Hey all, and welcome to a new video. Here is your Federico from cloudy Berlin. Sometimes Berlin, always cloudy. That's a quote. And in this video, we are going to go on with our 2D shooter game programming. Before we go on though, I want to show you the current state of the game, since I've kept working on it a bit off screen, and I changed a couple of things. We have a different image for the starship, and for the projectile we have a scrolling background which gives us the idea that we are flying into space. We have multiple shoots, so when I press the mouse it will keep shooting, and when I release it will stop. And then we added a soundtrack and a fire sound effect. So it starts to look like a real game, it starts to look like something pretty nice. So in this video, we're going to cover a bunch of these elements. So without any further ado, let's dive in. So that's the project as we left it last time. And you know what? We have a bunch of images here that we are actually not using. So it doesn't make actually sense for us to have them in the project before we actually use them. It just occupies space and makes everything unclear. So I would like to remove them. The problem is that on the Explorer, on the project organizer thingy here, we can just delete one at a time, or at least I didn't find a way to delete multiple at the times. So what we can do in order to solve this problem is to actually open our maxproj file inside a text editor, for example Visual Studio Code. There it is. And then we go, we get all these files, and we actually into media, and actually, you know what? Let's just delete all of them. So I will just select them all. The space, no, we need the space thingy, all the way up here. We leave the player starship, we leave the space background, we leave the projectile one, and that's it. I'm gonna save this file, I'm gonna close the project, gonna reopen it, and see if it worked. Okay, it looks like it worked. So now in our media folder, I'm going to actually get all the images, all of them. I'm going to cut them. I'm going to go, I have created a folder here called unused sprite outside of my project folder, and I will just copy them all here. Right, I think I copied also the space one, which we actually needed. So I go back to my project, media. It's empty, I will just drop back the space background.png. So great, now this is all we got. And let's get some new images, because the one from before, this one here, it's not so... I don't like it so much, it's a bit too small. It's only, I think, 16 pixels by 16, which is very small. So let's get actually another one. And always, as always, Kenney is full of good assets for us. I have downloaded this one, Space Shooter Redux. I will put a link in the description. So let's see what this package contains. Space Shooter. It has a bunch of PNGs, so we don't even have to slice them. So I'm going to get the playership blue.png. I'm going to go into my project folder, I'm just going to copy it here. We'll rename it, since we called it player starship.png, so I'm going to rename it with player starship.png. And then I'm going to get also the laser blue 03. Going to copy it in our media folder, and this is called projectile 1. Good. So now everything looks good. If I go into my project, I delete that, recreate it. Good. Great, we see that we have a different sprite going on, but it looks super strange because everything is kind of squashed. That's because we have to put the preserve aspect in our sprite class, but that's all good. So great, after we did all this preliminary stuff, we changed our images. Let's go inside our code and start coding. So I'm going to go into Visual Studio Code, I'm going to open the code folder for the project, and there it is as we left it last time. So first thing first, let's actually modify our sprite class in order to have the sprite preserve the aspect of the image. So we're going to go in our sprite class in the game assets file, and we're going to say this.vp.preserve aspect equal to 1. Right. let's save that. Let's go here, let's delete the file and recreate it, and now it's preserving the aspect. Now it looks much better. So good, so now the proportions of the images inside our game are automatically correct. They are not just squares. Good, so let's go in the code. You know what, the wall assets class, it's basically useless. I came to this conclusion because we should actually just instantiate the images directly inside the classes for which we use them, without this whole get assets stuff, which is completely actually useless. So what I'm going to do is that inside the game Starship, for example, I'm not going to assign the image, the sprite Starship, to null. I'm going to assign it to a new sprite which reads our player Starship PNG, basically this line here. I'm going to just copy it here. And then I'm just going to automatically enable it. So this sprite Starship dot enable sprite 1. Exactly, that's the function to enable it. And then I'm going to get also the projectile sprite. I'm going to copy it instead of null. And I'm going to enable it. So this sprite projectile dot enable sprite 1. Then I'm going to go here where we assigned it. I'm going to cut this stuff from here. I'm just going to put it here. Enable sprite. We actually don't want the projectile to be on top of the starship, so I think I will set this layer to 0, and I will set the layer of the sprite starship to 1, so the sprite starship is always on top of our projectile, exactly, otherwise the projectile being on top of the starship is a bit strange. So this is now correct. Now we can just get rid of the assign ship sprite and assign projectile sprite functions. I'm gonna save this file. I'm going to basically just delete the whole assets class in the game assets file, which now only just contains the sprite function, the sprite class. So we could actually rename this file. I think we're going to do that later. And for the game background as well, we should do the same thing. So actually, how was this called? New sprite space background. I'm going to go here. We don't actually need to. We don't need the assign function anymore. We just need to create this sprite, enable it, set it full screen. Good. In the game assets again, let me redelete that. And we should be good to go. I will go into my patcher. I will delete the file, recreate it, and we get a bunch of errors. Player ship is undefined. Player ship is undefined. Oh yeah, of course, we don't need anymore the whole init function inside our game file, exactly. So we just delete the whole thing. Let me save. Player ship is undefined, line 29. Oh, and that's because we still have our gassets object, which we have to get rid of. Also in the notify deleted function. So this should be it. So if I go here and give it a try, okay, now it works. Perfect. So we got rid of our assets class. We just instantiate the sprites inside the classes themselves without having to use this whole assets thing, which was honestly pretty useless. Good. So let me make the starship a bit smaller because it looks a bit too big. So let's make it a bit smaller. Let's go inside the sprite ship class. Let's say instead of set layer, we say set scale, and I'm going to something like 0.5, I think. I'm going to delete the JS object, recreate it. Oh no, it was actually much smaller than that. Sorry, where do we set the scale for that? Because by default it's 0.2, right? So we should actually set it to something like 0.12, maybe something like that. So I'm going to here recreate it. This looks right side, maybe it's a bit too small. Now it looks about right. Now we must make the projectile a bit smaller, so let's make it actually 0.04. Let's go here, let's delete it. Right, this looks about right. Cool. Let's now make it in a way that we fire So when we press the mouse button, it will fire, and when we release the mouse button, it will stop firing, and it will continuously fire, so this laser stuff. So in order to do that, inside our game starship thing, we don't need anymore to have a single sprite for the projectile. We need to actually have an array that keeps tracks of all our projectiles. So let's create an array and call it this sprite projectile array. Let's assign it to an empty array, right? And then inside our fire function, what we want to do is to do this. I'm going to comment this all out. We want to first push a new projectile inside our array. So this dot sprite underscore projectile array dot push, and we want to push inside a new sprite with the projectile png, projectile1.png. That's our image file for the projectile. Good. Then we want to enable it. So let's do like this. This projectile array push. We need to get to the latest element in this array, so we will get it with this dot sprite projectile. Actually, let's create a new variable and say latest index. It's equal to this sprite projectile array dot length -1. So the whole length of the array, so how many elements we have in the array, -1. So this will be the index of the latest element we pushed in the array. We have to enable this. So enable sprite 1. We need to basically set the layer as we did here. So we will set the layer to 0. So let's just copy this part and say set layer to 0. We could have actually even a projectile class where we just init a new projectile and we'll have all the things automatically set. Maybe we will do this in the future. And then what else do we do? Set the scale. We say the 0.04, I think. Right. We could even set actually a variable for that inside our sprite ship class. Let's actually do it with this projectile scale equals 0.04. So this we have to set to this projectile scale. Good. And then after the scale, we need to just set its position, which is going to be the position of our ship. So we're going to go here, dot set position, and this is going to be our this sprite starship dot get position. It will give us the position of this of our player ship, or the ship we are using at the moment. Okay, great, and we don't need anything anymore inside here, I think. We delete also the is firing thing. For the moment, we will do it in a different way, so let's delete that. So this function is called every time we click with the mouse. The ship is going to fire. Good, so it's going to create a new instance of the projectile sprite, put it inside this array, and then initialize it. Good, and then we have to move it. So in the update function, let's actually create a function and call it this update projectile position. And this is going to be a new function. So in the update function, basically, we want to update the position of all the projectiles inside our array. So let's comment this all out. We don't even need to have this if fire thing, because this is going to happen. The fire function now is going just to push a new projectile inside the array, and then if there are projectiles in the array, we're going to update them in the update function. So we don't have to check anymore if it's actually firing. So we're going to do something like that for var projectile, or let's call it just proj in this sprite projectile array. We have to say first we have to get the position of this projectile in order to update it. So let's create a variable, a temporary variable, call it projectile pos, and this is going to be equal to this dot sprite projectile array proj dot get position. Right, and then we need to update the epsilon component of the position of the projectile with our projectile speed, which I think we already had it. No, we didn't have it. We were just using an hard-coded number, but we're going to create a variable for that. So this projectile speed, it's equal to 0.05. So we're going to use that to update the epsilon position of our projectile. Good. And then we need to set back this position to our projectile. So this sprite projectile array proj dot set position to this new position. So proj pos. All right. And then we need a way to say that if this projectile went over the border of our window on the epsilon side, then we need to destroy this sprite and to free a place in the array. So we're going to do like this. If this sprite projectile array, actually we can say like this. If proj pos 1, so it's going to be the epsilon position of our projectile, is greater than 1, which is the border of our window on the vertical axis. If this is greater than 1, it means the projectile is gone. Then we have to say this sprite projectile array proj dot destroy. We're going to delete the, we're going to free the C memory. So inside our sprite class, we have this destroy function that will free the memory for the C objects. Great. And then we need to remove this projectile from our array. So we're going to use this splice function in JavaScript to remove something from an array at a certain index. So we're going to say splice, and the index is just going to be proj. That's basically the index of this element. This is this variable here. This is basically for this index in this array, basically, do that. So this should then free our projectiles array. So we're going to call this function basically inside our update function. Let's call it after updating the ship position. So this update projectile position. Good. Okay, I have no idea what will happen if we are going to save now. Just as a proof of work, let's print. Let's actually, sorry, I have a function called print, but let's actually post the length of this array just to make sure that it's currently deleting then the elements that are beyond our screen. So good. I'm going to go in the patch, just delete that, and okay, as you can see, is whoa. Splice is not a function. Yeah, of course, I'm calling it on the wrong thing. I don't have to call it on the element inside this array, I have to call it on the array itself. Sorry about that. So I'm going to go here, delete that again, recreate it. And, okay, something is definitely wrong, but as you can see, it's at least emptying our array. As soon as the elements go above 1, they are destroyed. So this is working. There's a bunch of stuff which is not working though. As you can see, like not all the projectiles are appearing, or there is something weird going on. And this took me quite a long time to solve. I didn't get what the problem was. And then I realized that some projectiles are on top of the background and some projectiles are below the background. And that's because the background doesn't has a layer set to 0. Which then means that sometimes it's going to be on top of other stuff with layer 0, sometimes it's going to be below. So this was a very evil bug. So what we're going to do is to go into the game background class and say this sprite pg.set layer. I'm going to set it to -1 because the background must be, of course, below everything else. So now this should work. Let's go in our game starship class. Let's delete these. Save, go in the main patch, delete the JS so it does its cleaning, and now it works. So you can see that as soon as we are clicking, it's adding shoots, and then when they are reaching the top of our screen, then they get then it gets sliced away from our array and the sprite gets destroyed, so our memory doesn't suffer too much from it. There is some weird stuff once in a while, like we get a lot of them. But my desired behavior is not that we have to click in order to have multiple shots, but just that we keep it clicked and then it's going to continuously shoot. So in order to do that, let's do like this. Let's go into our Starship class, and we have this isFiring variable, right? So let's create a new function here. So this set is firing or something like that. The new function takes a value. And let's say this is firing. It's equal to value. So, okay. So what we're going to do is that in the game file, in our main file, we say when we click on the mouse, we're going to set the function set is firing with the button. So when we click the button, it's going to then set this function. So this is firing is either true or false. And then in the update function, we're going to do like this. If this is firing, then this fire. So directly in the update function, so basically at every frame for the moment, we're going to create a new projectile at every frame, right? Because we call it inside the update function, which gets called with a bang from the world. So it's going to happen at every frame. So let's give it a try. All right. So as soon as I keep the mouse clicked, it's going to create a bunch of projectiles. Also, sometimes when I release the mouse, the world doesn't get it correctly because I think it's related to the frame rate. So instead of using the mouse from the world, what we can use is to use the mouse state object. Say load bang, or actually just load mass pool, I think actually it's called. So like poll, and this will continuously give us the mouse state. Let's give it a try. Yeah, exactly. So we're going to use that instead of the click from the world, because this is much more reliable than the click from the world. This I discovered. So, okay. So now with that, we can see that we are shooting a lot and everything looks good. Let's go back into our game Starship class. Just to make sure, let's again post, just to be sure that this is working. Let's post the length of this array, this sprite projectile array dot length plus let's put then a new line character. I think this should work and send us to the next line. Good. Just to make sure again that is deleting our sprites once they reach the end of the board. Yeah, okay, looks like it's deleting them, it's destroying them. As you can see, the size of the array increases and then decreases back to 0. That's pretty cool. Let's just comment it out, we could still use it in the future. Good, so now what we want to do actually is to not shoot at every frame when we press the button, but to choose a certain interval on which it should do it. And to do that, I think we are going to have into our main file a new variable which we call it FPS counter, initialize it to 0, and every time we bang, this is going to grow. So gfps counter plus plus, actually after we update the Starship, so at the end of our bang function, and inside here we're going to pass it. Actually, it's a global variable, so we don't need to pass it. So inside our game Starship, we are going to do that. If this is firing and gfps counter module, and this is what decides our interval. Like for example, we could say every 10 frames, every 4 frames. I'm going to say every 4 frames. So every 4 frames, this is going to be equal to 0, and this is going to fire. So the fire rate for the moment is depending on our frame rate, which is not optimal. We're going to improve this in the future, but for the moment, let's just keep it like this. So exactly. So now, every 4 frames, we are going to fire when we click the mouse. And that's pretty neat, because now it doesn't look like a seamless stream of projectiles. Now this looks like separate projectiles. And that's pretty nice. That's pretty cool. So good. For the moment, we are going to stop here in this video. We arrived to the point where we can shoot multiple projectiles. We changed the image for our sprite. We set the preserve aspect to 1. We deleted the assets class, which we discovered was useless. And we are getting closer and closer to have a nice looking, beautiful 2D game in Max MSP. So thank you very much for following, everyone. I'm really proud of you if you made it this far. I hope you learned a lot during the process, and there is a lot more goodies to come. So stick around, subscribe to the channel, like the video, that will be much appreciated. And I hope to see you in the next one. Have fun and see you soon. Ciao.